So there's different there's different things that I believe a company could do to protect themselves, but it's going to take a little money, and it's going to take a little time, and it's going to take I would say, the patience to ensure that you have redundancies in place to ensure that you can build a platform that is hyper converged or not hyper converged, or is in effect, I would say a hybrid to a certain degree.
Welcome to the riskadvisor.com podcast. I am Jim Henry here with my good friend and co-host Sal Lafreri. Before we begin, I would like to remind each of you to subscribe to this show and push the like button for us. Please leave comments, as your opinion is important to us. The title for today's podcast is The Growing Threat Posed by Big Tech Monopolies. Clearly, this is a current event that has captured everybody's imagination. Sal, the recent selective, subjective actions by several big tech companies to unilaterally terminate services illustrates, in my mind, a real and growing threat to both individuals and corporations. What do you say?
Yeah, I just, every day you sit there and you shake your head and you go, "Nah, this can't be happening. This can't be going on." What I don't necessarily like is the response that they're giving to it, which is virtually nothing. I mean, they're relatively silent and doing what they're doing. I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of challenges that are going to come out of this. And it's going to be interesting to see what side of the fence they really take. There's a conversation, I guess the three of us were having during the week, right, about them being a utility.
Yeah.
If you're going to try and say that you're a part of the press and that, people who are making comments that they can't be held accountable for, and it's the people's comments, that's one thing, but then you can't at the other side censure it. So you got to pick a side of the table that you want to be on. You're either part of the press, you're part of a utility, or you're a private company. And if you're a private company, you should be subject to all of the regulations that are out there. They just seem to be in limbo and taking advantage of all of it.
I guess that's the old having your cake and eating it too, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be, it's going to be interesting to see. And I think it'll follow the money, right? It always comes down to the money. And let's see what, when it starts to cause some heartburn, starts to cause them money, then maybe things might change. But
to try and make some sense of really what this new risk element is, we had to reach out to to the best and brightest, and return engagement by Pierre Bourgex. Pierre's been on the podcast a couple times already, but this is right up his alley. He's again spent 30 years as a global security consultant and innovator through his experience with the RAND Corporation, the U.S. State Department, ADT, Tyco Security, High Security, Wallace International, Secure State, and Boone Edom. And currently, Pierre is the CTO and founder of ESI Convergent, as well as the CTO of Secure PCN. Pierre, welcome back.
Hello, guys.
So Pierre, many are at risk for having their communications or their cloud services subjectively terminated just because your provider decides they don't agree with you, your philosophy and or your business. Is it that as simple as it looks?
Well, yes and no. And, this has been brewing for many years. As we've moved to the cloud, and most corporations have had to make some very, very difficult decisions over the many years that we've seen IT grow and obviously infrastructure grow. People have built companies based upon, using the cloud as their infrastructure. And just so you understand, for everybody out there, it's important to understand that the cost of building out your own infrastructure as a business, right? Especially if you're on the web and if you are a digital platform, is expensive. It's very, very costly. And it's a decision that oftentimes is really, made very, very, I want to say more difficult than it is more easier decision to make, because you have to define, what kind of revenue you're going to make over time doing something like this. So it's a big risk, right? And so, there are different types of clouds that people have built to support themselves and grow their business. And, some are infrastructure as a service, some are, platform as a service. You've heard software as a service, where you're just renting the opportunity, their solution, or you're building your own solution, you're building your own platform, right? So that's the question you have to have, right? And in doing so, if you're building your infrastructure, or you're basically allowing the cloud provider, AWS, Huawei, Highway, everybody in the way, you're basically putting your business in their hands, right? But you're making that good decision to say, well, it's less costly to do that because they built their platform. They built their data centers. They have it secure. They've got, all this opportunity for us to build our SDKs, our programs, our software under their platform, either it be Azure or AWS or all the, different flavors that are around the world. The problem is that once you do that and you make a wrong decision, and I'm not talking about making a decision on what you believe and what you don't believe, because that's your private business. It's the fact that your business is in control of someone else. And that's the struggle. That's the $1 million gorilla, because it's not a 100-pound gorilla anymore. Because now you have businesses who basically exchange their control to someone else. They've deferred the control. We say liability.
Outsourcing. It's the worst case of outsourcing, the most vulnerable.
It's the worst case of outsourcing. And the problem is that, the cloud providers have done such a great job. They really have, to control that, right? And it's even getting worse, because we'll talk a little later about something called, hyperscaling, which is controlling the edge, right? And not only we control the business, but we'll control the edge, right, from the cloud perspective. So there's different there's different things that I believe a company could do to protect themselves, but it's going to take a little money, and it's going to take a little time, and it's going to take the patience to ensure that you have redundancies in place to ensure that you can build a platform that is hyper-converged or not hyper-converged, or is in effect, I would say hybrid to a certain degree. And I think many have talked about hybrid models of cloud, which is basically partly under my control, partly under the cloud provider's control. And I think, like we've had examples with Parlay, what happened with Parlay or Parler, whatever you want to call it. It's a perfect example of what we're talking about, because we have, in effect, I believe they had a PaaS model, platform as a service, that kind of bled into infrastructure as a service. And what they didn't do, fortunately for them, is they didn't have the cloud provider build SDK, which is basically their sauce, their software. And they basically had the software provided into the cloud. So that's why they're able to restart, right, in their own infrastructure, or someone else that is, more willing to sign a contract that protects them. So, it's a wild west. It's never changed. And you hit the nail on the head, Sal, with respect to utility versus private versus media? And I think that's the big question mark, right? And I think that's where I'm headed in my thought pattern in terms of what we have to do to protect our business versus big tech.
Well, we're gonna try and get our arms around this. I mean, it's not that long ago that CEOs were first shaking their head over the move to the internet, and all of a sudden they saw this big threat of cyber attacks coming, and a lot more investment to try and mitigate those risks, which was eating away at savings they thought they were going to get by the convenience of going to the internet. And we're still dealing with that. And now this threat to the by the cloud providers themselves, let alone the third party actors. They're realizing that if they put all their eggs in somebody else's basket, they could take that basket and go someplace, and they're stuck. So, but you can't ignore these two threats; they're real. The horsepower and the value and the efficiency, the computing power of what you can get, with the internet and with the cloud are real. But you got to be aware of how you're doing what you're doing, and where do you have risks that you need to be able to mitigate. So.
In a couple of minutes we have before we take a break, I just, Pierre, I guess my question is, how much of this just seems to be sort of the pendulum sort of swinging back to the middle? And, you start out with, you had the servers, you had all your equipment, all your technology, everything localized to your property. We go in, we do the risk assessments, we recognize the vulnerability that exists. So then we come out and we say, okay, well, now you can offset some of that out to the cloud. Pendulum switches to that side. Everything goes out to the cloud. Everything is wonderful and beautiful. And now here we are. Are we not pulling back and trying to get us back to the middle?
Yeah, and I think that the issue is the controls that you have in place to, as Jim said, the issue of security is still a big problem, right? So, you can take some of that back in, right? Some of that saying, I'm going to control some of that, but then you have to have the IT security, the security infrastructure in place. And the way you communicate plays a major role within that private environment, right? So, yeah, I totally agree. I think that, like everything, politics, including technology, we tend to swing hard right, swing hard left, and find ourselves smack dab in the middle again, trying to figure out, did we do the wrong thing or the right thing? And oftentimes, you get bruises along the way.
Yeah. Jim, want to take us out to the next break?
Certainly. You are listening to the Risk Advisor podcast, hosted by myself, Jim Henry, and Sal Lafreri. We invite you to comment on our blog at theriskadvisor.com and subscribe to this show. If you are interested in having one or both of us speak at an upcoming event or would like to consult with us, please go to our web page at theriskadvisor.com to set that up. Getting into the next segment here, let's talk a little bit about the logistics of this, this problem, and which will help us understand, how to provide some solution or some mitigation to that risk. So, just as communication systems are exposed to the internet and are impossible to secure, the current lack of regulation of big tech monopolies makes it impossible to totally eliminate the risk of subjective termination. So, Pierre, logistically, how do we mitigate it if we can't guarantee we can eliminate it?
So, I think one of the most important parts to the story that everybody has to, understand is, legally speaking, right? You have to determine how you can protect the public from the overreach of cloud providers or government, or we'll just say, providers of infrastructure for those companies. if people don't understand that, they don't understand that the law plays a role here. That's where we start getting in trouble, because we don't realize that if we deem these companies, these cloud providers, to simply be private companies that can do whatever they want, or they're deemed media, which with no controls, as media has controls, or we deem them as utility. So we're caught between, we're the ones, the public, or let's just say the entrepreneur, the owner of companies. We're caught in a rock and a hard place. We have legislators that have made good decisions to help us mitigate that problem. And no legal contract, unfortunately, is going to protect you 100% without the backing of the FCC or any other government agency. And they haven't been given the rules because the big tech firms have developed their own rules, right? And they're all talking to each other like the steel companies used to do, like the motor industry used to do. Well, what happened was that, there was a point where, they saw that being, price fixing, manipulation of the market, monopoly activity, vertical monopolies, right? We're starting to be seen, right? That's what, people were worried about in regards to Microsoft, right? So now you have this problem, this big elephant in the room, and everybody's fearful of making that good decision because, they think, could it harm the economy? I mean, let's just think about that, right? Are these guys too big to fail? Is that where we are today? I mean, remember that whole conversation in 2001, right? Or 2008, excuse me, when, everybody said, well, we can't let this business go out of business. What happened in Ma Bell? Let's go back to that, right? When a utility became so big that the government stepped in and said, we got to split this up a little bit because, it's just way too big. Why? Because they were pretty much, controlling everything. They turn right, they turn left. Nobody had a chance to compete.
Yeah.
So
the good part of that, though, was that it was defined as a utility. There were regulations accordingly, and you can apply to regulation. However, haphazardly, Congress has a way of doing things at times, but they could apply it accordingly. But I think what we got today, and the real problem, is that you have all of this is being judged by end user licensing agreements, which basically is always in the favor of the company. And that has become, in essence, the legislative action. And that's, I think, is where the real thrust of this all comes down to.
You got it. And that's, so when you deal with the IT industry, right? We'll just say the software industry, they have a certain rule sets, right? That they've been living by, and channel sets, and how they've built their businesses. It's not the same as any other company and any other industry. I'm sorry to say, it's organic, and they've built their own laws and rules because with that in mind. There was no such thing as cloud, really 30 years ago. Nobody even knew what the hell is a cloud, right? Nobody understood any of this. And so they were able to build this process and really build their own economy. And that's really important to understand. They have built their own economy, an economy of scale, global economy, that in and of itself, if you take the four companies, right, that rule this marketplace, if you took any one of them down, you would eliminate an economy. And that's how bought in the world is to this infrastructure. So they know that. They're not stupid. They know exactly that, look, you can't get rid of us. You can control us, but we're just going to move to the next control. Now, I think you're right about that. Are they deemed a utility? If they're deemed a utility, that does put more controls over them and guideposts that inevitably they can't avoid. They're going to have to deal with them, which means that we'll then tie them to a regulated market. And we all know about regulated markets. You have of course, auditing, you have people through oversight. It's different. It's not like going, having the four big tech companies being questioned by, a few congressmen and congresswomen. I mean, that's a joke. You want money to be a problem. If you do something wrong, we can then fine you $20 million, $50 million, $120 million. That's what needs to happen. And frankly, the arbitrary decision to shut a company down would fall under that legality. And before they were able to do that, they would have had to go to an advisory board of the commission that supervises this new entity called, the cloud infrastructure, auditing, national auditing group that like a PCI or like a NERC, SIP, something along those lines. And they would have had to say, look, these are the reasons why we're concerned. And they would say, okay, we need to go to the company, parlor, and say, here are the things that we have to have you stop because of this. Not an arbitrary thing from a private company telling another private company, you need to stop. That's absurd. That has no validity in law. We've just pretty much eliminated the whole aspect of the judiciary in one full swoop.
It's the subjectiveness of that end user licensing agreement where they're claiming, well, you violated the terms of the service. And, who's the arbiter as to who decides when that violation occurred?
That's right. And because of that, you have this fear now. I mean, look, I don't really care about parlay this or that. It's about the rule of doing business and what we've seen. And I'm in the security and IT industry and physical security industry for how many years? This is something totally, absurd. I mean, this isn't even playing the rules, the rule book. There isn't a rule book for this.
True.
So do you think that there is, it's too early in this next Congress to take that temperature yet, but do you think that they're
not going to touch it?
Bipartisan, or is it going to take the power of public opinion to force them to address this? Because the financial contributions at this point that they're making politically, and this is an unholy alliance.
It'll take at least 2 years in this new government, however it shapes out, to have people on both sides start realizing that this is going to affect their election. They don't care, frankly. I mean, look, I hate to tell you, but the political winds are already so convoluted that I don't believe anybody's going to take on anybody. They're just going to hunker down right now for the next year and a half until and it's all about politics, right? It's all about money, contribution, and politics. And unfortunately, because we have a two-party system, they're entrenched. So we're all sitting here like, fools, waiting for the next, thing to drop. And while we're just doing our job and trying to make, an income. The problem is that as advisors and as consultants, I think the only way to protect yourself until that happens is you need to create a hybrid model and you have to divorce yourself from being a full cloud provider. Now, the problem that I see is there are manufacturers that have squarely put themselves in harm's way by really relying solely on the cloud. Now, hold on. I don't disagree. I understand why they're doing it. But I think from the standpoint of that, they should try to look at developing a hybrid private versus AWS cloud, right? So they have some control over how the distribution of data is taking place for their clients. So I think that, there are access control companies that are fully cloud-based, which are good, are great. And I'm a firm believer, by the way, I'll raise my hand about them. But I would, as an advisor, I would say in these times we're in, now, access control is not the same thing as, say, digital platform. But because there are no comments, there's no opinions. It's just data, right? So I guess when it comes to metadata, you can get away with that. But if I were them, I would make sure that we start building out with some of the revenue I'm making in a private cloud that allows me to control some of that infrastructure.
Well, before we get into the solutions of those different avenues we could take, which will be segment 3, and before we leave the logistics, just theoretically, if there was going to be some regulation containment or splitting up of this big monopoly that we've got right now, because they're really chameleons, right? They're in storage, they're in communications. You talked about hyperscaling. Maybe give a little bit more about what the ramifications of what that means, about how their tentacles continue to go out, and how would you even, if you were in that position, how would you, the way they did with Ma Bell, to break them up into the local operating telephone companies versus the big Ma Bell, how feasible is that now? Because their identity changes almost weekly.
I have an answer for that.
Out into the markets.
So what you do is you separate their companies, right? So a Google platform or an AWS platform, they have to separate their business units completely. They're segmenting completely their business units. They have to run under compliance and regulations that are separate because they touch separate things, like hyperscaling. And I don't know if you want to go into that yet, but that is really the cloud at the edge, right? That's in effect you're using 5G and the birth of 5G to take cellular ready devices, connect them to the cloud, and touch the edge and really send data directly from that edge, not hitting any of your infrastructure at all, right?
Which is why the greatest threat that we saw from Huawei was that 5G, right?
That's right. And 5G is a big, big, big elephant in the room. And I think that, there's a lot of people that know that tied to secure communication, which, secure PCN, we understand that, because you have to inevitably control that. You don't control that, you're giving up everything. You might as well just walk in and say, who am I paying the bill to? Because you have no control. And that's the scary part of all of this.
I think it's a great place to take a quick break, and that'll take us into the solutions, and we can continue on with that. Just want to remind listeners that you're listening to the Risk Advisor podcast hosted by Jim Henry and me, Sal Lafreri. We're going to invite you to comment on our blog at theriskadvisor.com, and we're going to ask you to subscribe to this show on your favorite platform. If you're interested in having Jim or me or both of us speak at an upcoming event, either virtually or in person, would like to consult with us, we're going to ask you to please go to the webpage at theriskadvisor.com to help set that up. Solutions. Pierre, what do you think the actual solutions to this is going to be?
So I think there's a few, right? I think each company has to start defining their cloud strategy. They're going to have to sit back and understand what does their cloud infrastructure look like presently. And that means taking a deep breath, sitting down with your business functions and say, how many pieces of my business are presently in the cloud, and what are those? How do we have to ensure that we either duplicate or replicate or add on so that we still control our business model ourselves? Now, that means you have to decide, are you a pure cloud company? Are you a hybrid company? Are you really not needing the cloud as much as you need it today, but you should be able to tailor it to the requirements of your business? That's going to be the first thing, right? I mean, you have to either and get help. Third-party consultants will help you look at your architecture, defining that, sitting down with your business, and you're going to have to spend some money. Now, if you're going to tell me, look, I don't have any money to spend. Okay, fine. So you have to make a decision. If you are a full cloud company that you have built this business on that, right? You have to set up a way to ensure that if something were to take place, you could move to a private environment. So have something structured so that you could always make a switch if necessary. All right. That's a big lift. That's a hard lift.
But how quickly could you make that move if you go that route?
I would say 3 to 6 months, you could start heading down the right path. I mean, you don't eat an elephant all at one bite. You got to take pieces of it and say, what part of your business is the most critical? And is it tied to the cloud? And if data is a big thing for you, where most companies, like if you're a marketing company, if you're an architectural company, if you're a lawyer, you're relying on cloud to help you, and I can guarantee you a lot of them are using 365, which is great, Azure, Microsoft 365. But if your cloud infrastructure, your systems are fully SDK'd or built on to an AWS Azure platform, and they have control over the licenses, oh boy. So to me, I'm going to say, well, I need to take some of that back, and I need to figure out how much it would cost for me to build out some of that software. If you're an ongoing business, you have to make that decision. You start budgeting for that. And so if it takes you a year, it's okay. Look, if you're not in harm's way, you're not having to worry about it too much, all right? If you're just micro data, you have basically, you don't have that type of data that is going to be a problem, like it's access control data, or if it's, maybe video data is important. If it's analytics, it's important. I mean, you have to make a decision, right? I think really it's something that people are going to have to really finally pay attention to. I've spoken about this many times, and a lot of people have tried to explain this, and consultants like myself. But unfortunately, people just go, "Oh, it's not my problem. Let them do it," and that's the problem.
Well, I think the social media companies and big tech actually did everyone a favor by being so overt and in your face with this light switch that they've thrown off on a number of people and entities that, this has really captured the news like 9/11 did. I mean, it's that monumental. Well, what people are looking at, that of what has just occurred to some big corporations, let alone the president. I mean, that's certainly a headline grabber.
Putting the president in the corner and giving him a timeout. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's also a big issue, because the reality is that who's governing that decision, those decision-making practices.
They aren't elected officials, are they?
And the problem is that it's opinion, right? It's opinion. Everybody's got an opinion, and of course, each one's going to take their side. But when that happens, you start seeing some danger around the corner. I mean, look, unfortunately, the fact is that big tech, right, is tied, in many cases, the Democratic Party. So what are you going to do, right? I mean, that's how it looks to everybody, and they're supposed to be middle ground. They're supposed to not have an opinion if they're going to be the media. Well, unfortunately, we know that's not working. I mean, look at what's happening across the board. Everybody's taking a side. So, I mean, recently I heard that CNN wants to, take Newsmax out of the play. So, I mean, it's getting worse and worse. So, if I'm a private business, I can't be in the middle of all that. I gotta conduct business to make money. And if I'm worried so much about that, then I should be worried about that and start doing something about it. Right. And so the key is, we said before, one of the main solutions should be regulation, right? Creating a regulated infrastructure to ensure that there's some audit and accountability. But I don't see that happening for a little while. So, there's not going to be any miracles. It's going to take a while. And frankly, they know they got the power because they not only, I mean, who's going to sue them, right? Are you kidding me? Right? So, they turn somebody off. Oh, great, there's a lawsuit. And they're going to say, well, because we thought you had all this kind of stuff going on and we felt it was bad. And, we were asked by somebody to turn you off. And, it was because it was a national crisis. I mean, okay, that's so subjective at this point. And I'm not saying I'm taking one side or the other. I'm not. I'm taking on the middle ground and saying, I don't care what position you are. What is what is right based upon the constitutionality. And I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a business guy. I'm a technologist. I've been in an intelligence environment. I know that there are certain things that are right and wrong. And so there's just a lot of, it smells really funny, and it's not because I'm it's me. So I'm just telling you right now that that's where the rubber meets the road. Now,
so we're not gonna solve the big problem here or address politically what's going to happen, but we can provide some options to business owners that want to mitigate their risk. So in the first podcast that we did with Secure PCN, we were really focusing on getting your critical communications insulated from the internet, and didn't quite give as much paid much attention, to the cloud side of where that information then was going, or how that was being controlled. So maybe in the last few minutes we have here, maybe you can refresh us on that, on how that architecture and the hybrid approach with the cloud strategy is really the best that that CEOs can do at this point.
So I think there's two things going on, right? So the cloud is headed towards the edge. That's one aspect, and we're going to have to deal with the fact that hyperscaling, and we'll give you some information on that. But basically, all it is the ability to create cellular-ready devices and be able to connect with 5G and go to the cloud directly. Okay. The problem with all of that is it's not giving you any security. It's not allowing you to ensure that you are in control of that communication. And we're talking about from point of sale communication. We're talking about data communication where your data could be stolen, could be taken by man-in-the-middle attacks, vulnerabilities that just expand based upon technology at the edge, but also basically your communication to business. So what happened is that I thought about this as a problem for many years and said, look, this should be able to help the cloud environment and the private environment, where you can start, in effect, protecting communications within your infrastructure. Why? Because the internet is porous. We already know there is no way to secure the internet. And what's the cloud? The cloud functionally is a data center, but it needs to receive that information from you. So that means you have to use the internet. Well, unfortunately, people don't get 1 + 1. They think it's 3, but it's 2. So that means you've got to have communication strategies that are able to take that data securely off the internet and be able to communicate them, if you want, to the cloud. So be it hybrid or not, what you should at least be doing is taking care of your hygiene, your infrastructure, just so that when you do business, your intellectual property is not being stolen right from the backside of the office, or your POS transactions aren't being hacked. Because look, here's the problem. As we rely more on cellular 5G, you better darn well believe that the next threat vector is those people playing man-in-the-middle attacks at your device trying to steal that data. If you don't have something like Secure PCN, and I don't mean to be a commercial, but that's the only thing out there in the world right now that can help you, other than building your own MPLS tunnel and spending a lot of money, because you need a cost-effective way to secure and support whatever strategy you have. I'm just telling you right now, if you don't look at that, you're simply putting yourself in harm's way, and you're really not being prepared for the future. The future, my friends, all people need to be aware of is it is going cellular. And you can talk to Elon Musk. He knows that's why he's putting satellites out there in space so that he can control a new internet, because he knows it's cellular and satellite. It's not hardwire. It's not your Ma Bell line. It's not going to be what is going to support the world of billions of devices that are interconnected. It doesn't work that way. And everybody knows that. But you know what? As I've said for many years, I sit at the mountaintop, I yell and scream, the flood's coming, the flood's coming. And sometimes what I talk about, they see. Sometimes they don't see, and they get blindsided.
Yeah. Well, how would you recommend people follow up, with you if they want to take this to the next level?
Well, best way is go to securepcn.com, and you can get myself, Pierre, at ESI Convergent, which is our parent company, and or Sean S. Grimm at securepcn.com, who is our CRO. So I think that's always the best way to get out. But SecurePCN, go to securepcn.com. All the details are there. You can learn about it. And I'd say, our consulting practice on ESI Convergent, Butchco ESI, which is now, we've now merged as a business, and it's going really well. And frankly, the remediation is, what we profess, secure communication, secured identity, secured cloud, and secured entry. Those are the four elements that we have to be concerned about. And cloud.
Well, I tell you, Pierre, you should. If you were this accurate as a weatherman, you'd be pretty famous, because it's just something. You have been talking about this for the last year or two, and man, the events of the last 60 days.
That's right.
prophetic. I mean, Sal, you got any closing thoughts?
No, I'm good. I think it's going to be interesting to see where all of this takes us. I think the first 100 days is going to be interesting.
Yes,
it will.
All righty. You have been listening to the Risk Advisor podcast, hosted by myself, Jim Henry, and Sal Lafreri. We ask you subscribe to this show. We remind you, if you are interested in having one or both of us speak at an upcoming event or would like to consult with us, please go to our webpage at theriskadvisor.com to set that up. Remember that you can hear the show on your favorite podcast platform, and of course, stream it at theriskadvisor.com. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you tune in again next week.